can view it. I do appreciate y'all being on this evening. We try to do things that we would like for supervisors to see in the evenings because a lot of people, as you know, have day jobs and it's the season that people are busy outside. So we try to do these a little bit later at times so that more people can attend. I understand a lot of the office staff might not be as able to attend at this time of the day, but this will be recorded so we can go back and look at this anytime we would like. One thing that I want to start out with is I think anybody that's on this call today is very familiar with our situation in the state with Watershed Conservancy districts. The past year, since I've been in this job, this has been a priority of mine. It is getting back to where we're paying more attention to these. Shanna Drake, who is on our call today, is our watershed coordinator for the Division of Conservation. And even before some of the events that happened earlier this spring happened, we had started a process in which we were going to start providing more trainings, reaching out to districts more, and just providing more general support, both for the Watershed Conservancy districts and for the conservation districts that do house some of these Watershed Conservancy districts. By statute, Watershed Conservancy districts are kind of underneath the umbrella of conservation districts. So it's very important that your conservation district supervisors understand this as well, that they're really the first line of going up the chain even before we get up to DOC. So the more supervisors that we can have participate in these type of events, the better. As you know, education is key and understanding that the process is key. So just getting on that topic, and Jonna, I'm going to attempt to share my screen again here. You all can nod, or I can see Shanna right now, so Shanna can nod when she sees this being shared. A second.
Yes, I can see that.
Okay. Can you see the slides moving? Or no?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, good. Just so y'all know, here in the office, we have 3 computer screens, so sometimes it's a little juggling at getting all of them to work correctly together. So that's why we kind of bounce around sometimes. So first of all, I see that Renee Slaughter's on this call. She's from the Big Gritty Watershed. We used to work together a long, long time ago, and I ran credit with her with some of these photos that we're going to use today. And I do give Renee credit in most of the slideshow. We can't see it here on this screen. But this title slide is of Wells Lake in the Big Gritty Watershed. This is on a good day. Excellent photograph, an excellent overview of what a watershed lake looks like. Now, as I started telling you before we started sharing, we've kind of already started the process of gathering information on the Watershed Conservancy districts. As you all know, across the state, there are different levels of engagement and participation in what's going on in the Watershed Conservancy districts. And a lot of my time early on was spent on the Red Lick Watershed Conservancy District, and primarily in Madison County, also in Estill and Jackson counties, because they had a board that really didn't function anymore. We had a statute passed where the conservation districts actually took over the responsibility for that Watershed Conservancy District. Now, it varies across the state. I've talked to a lot of watershed districts that do a great job. Some are kind of in the middle and some not so much. So what we're trying to do is provide some support for everyone to kind of get back on the same page with these. As many of you know, a lot of these were built, the majority in Kentucky were built back in the 60s and 70s. Most of these were designed with a 50-year lifespan. So that means that most of these in Kentucky either have already exceeded that 50-year lifespan or are very close to doing so. Also in that time, we've had a lot of development around these lakes. And what that means is, for instance, if a lake was considered a low priority back when it was built in 1965, it could be a high priority today because some people built houses below the dam or even on the lake above the dam. So we kind of have different issues that are occurring right now, and that dam rehabilitation is one of those. And rehabilitation refers to NRCS primarily going back and looking at these dams to make sure they're constructed in a way that's meeting their current use, which is what hazard class they are. I don't recall the specific numbers on this, but I do know that there are numerous dams that have been moved from low to high hazard dams because of development. And that number just escapes me. It's been a while since I've looked at that specific number because of our other issue that just happened not too long ago, which was the flood event of early April. So on this slide, you can see the things in check mark that we've already kind of done. Shanna has been reaching out to districts across the state, gathering information. We're kind of getting a survey, kind of a landscape of what we're looking at. We've already kind of started the bottom list as well. We have developed a training plan. We did that for that Red Lick Watershed Conservancy District that I referenced before. And what we want to do, though, is we want to improve upon that because a lot of things have happened since we first did that training. We want to make sure that we cover all the issues that you see there: board responsibility, easements and property rights, dam operation and maintenance, the rehab that I just mentioned. And we're also shooting a video with the Division of Water right now, and Red Lick is one of the hosts of that, where we are going out with the engineers that actually inspect these dams. We're filming a video and they're going through their process and the things that they look for in these inspections. So that way you'll know what to expect when these engineers from DOW come out and they look at your dams. You'll know the kind of things that they're looking for. You'll know the type of maintenance that you need to do to keep those dams in good shape. Now, some of you might be really well versed in this. Some of you might not have ever even talked to one of the DOW engineering inspectors before. So all in all, it's going to be a good source of communication and knowledge so that you can better navigate what we're doing here. So we had this plan in place and we were kind of going along. And again, I've been here for a year and I've dealt with a few issues. So Shanna and I were just kind of getting our feet under us. We're also scheduled to go to Texas in end of April, 1st of May for a conference down there, the National Watershed Coalition Conference on watershed dams, to learn a little bit more. And then we had the flood of early April. I know there's nobody on here that's not familiar with this. I just wanted to show you this map. You may have seen this before, but this kind of shows you the precipitation characteristics of that event. That was actually, it says a 5-day precipitation. That's just the time they measured. It was actually a 4-day event. And you can see the highest is down here around the eastern purchase area. Marshall County is where you see that 15.86. Now, when I show people this map, sometimes they'll say, well, I had 16.5 at my house. That's probably true. Each county has a mesonet site. So these individual numbers are from that mesonet site within that county. So if you live 3 miles away from the site, you might have picked up a 1/2 inch more than this site did. But this is a good heat map to show you the primary distribution of this rainfall from this 3 or 4-day event. And what you see is the epicenter is down in the purchase area, the eastern purchase area, and it kind of trends up, kind of parallel with the Ohio River to the northeast, up to Hopkins County, Muhlenberg, Ohio, Grayson, northern Butler, northern Edmondson, even northern Logan down here, up into Hardin County and LaRue County. That's the highest area of precipitation. And of course, that correlates with where we have the most dams in the state. This map is from the NRCS Dam Watch. It sends alerts to the people that are registered on that. And those alerts come in 2 different forms. There is a precipitation alert that just kind of advises that heavy rainfall has been detected there. It crosses a certain threshold. But there's also spillway alerts, which means those auxiliary or emergency spillways have been initiated. That means water is flowing in those. And that's taken from a combination of radar estimation and satellite imagery. Of the 200 NRCS dams in the state, 197 had alerts during that rainfall event. So that was a pretty significant event across the state, especially down in the area where all the dams are. And of course, the result of that is some of the things that you see here. Renee, you'll be familiar with most of these pictures on here. One of these is from Caney Creek Watershed in Grayson County. the rest are from Big Reedy here. And I'm going to show you these a little bit more in just a second. So I want to kind of circle back to this photo. We can see a lake, and it's a good day, normal condition. Most of you are familiar with this. If you're on the Watershed Conservancy District Board, you have your dam, you have your riser here, and you have your primary spillway where that water typically flows out of that lake. You have your auxiliary spillway over here, which is graded to a certain elevation and has typically grass cover on it that is required to be mowed. And I wanted to point that out because I'm going to show you a few pictures in just a minute that's going to kind of show you some of the things that we really need to watch out for. One thing on this picture right off the bat that I want to point out is this nice paved driveway that goes across this dam into a farm over here. And we're going to see kind of what happened with that in a couple of slides. So we had this precipitation event, and Shannon and I kind of was like, well, what are we going to do? We've got to reach out somehow. So we really were kind of caught off guard, just like anybody else was. So immediately I asked Shannon to reach out to all the 38 Watershed Conservancy districts across the state. I think she actually reached out to 36. I had talked to 2 previously that week, so we covered the entire state. We really didn't have much to offer at that immediate time, but we wanted you all to know that we were going to be on this, and we're going to kind of walk you through this and assist you in any way that we can. About 2 weeks after that event, the photo here, we went out with NRCS staff, state NRCS state engineer, another engineer from the area, local NRCS staff. The gentleman standing right here next to me, his name is Gene Sauerborn. He is the director of the National Watershed Coalition. That coalition is kind of the governing body or the support body nationally for Watershed Conservancy districts. It was their conference that we were going to in Texas just a couple weeks after this. He lives in West Virginia, and he and this gentleman right here, who's the state NRCS engineer for West Virginia, drove down from West Virginia just to see this flooding event. And it was the primary topic at our training down in Texas a couple weeks after this. So I just wanted to show you, while I've got y'all on here, some of the damage that was done by these floods. And again, Renee, you don't understand your drone photos, how invaluable these are for us to use, because we're actually capturing this event in real time. It's not just after the fact like this picture was that we took that day we were out, but we can see what maybe led to some of this damage and some lessons learned here. In this instance, this is the same lake that I showed you before, Wills Lake. You can see the lake is filled to capacity right here and is engaged its emergency spillway. And you have good laminar flow, which is what is supposed to be happening until you get to that road. And you can see some white water starting to form right there. Just a subtle change in that, the ground cover right there caused that water to start tumbling a little bit. That changed. And when that changes and water starts tumbling is when you start to see erosion. Laminar flow is very good as long as you got grass cover on it. But once it starts tumbling, all bets are off and you're going to start to see erosion. And as you can see, as you continue down through here, you see more and more white water and it washes down this field. And right here, I was standing on this, what used to be the paved road looking down this spillway. And it eroded down to bedrock within this channel right here. Most of this rock you see here used to be up around this road. So you can see the damage that was done here on this site. This is another site in Big Reedy Watershed, just probably 2 or 3 miles away. The spillway is on the opposite side of the dam, on the river left, if you're looking downstream to our right. And you can see here, really good photo, good laminar flow right here in the spillway. It's flowing like it's supposed to, but once it hits this gravel drive in this instance, you can see it start to tumble. It hits a culvert down here as well, and there's kind of a wave train down through here. Now, under that wave train is what you see right over here. You see just a scoured path down through there, probably about 4 to 5 feet deep when you stand down in it, almost down to bedrock. So you can see the erosional forces happening when that engineering plan is not followed. Now, I'm not saying that these roads were not supposed to be here. I'm quite sure these property owners have permission to do this. So I don't want to sound like I'm making any indication like that, but they were not in the original plans, most likely, for these spillways. So anytime you change something from that original engineering, you're going to have issues that may arise like this. And it's something that you might have to prepare for if you have something like that. Now, this is a video that was shot. This is in Caney Creek Watershed in Grayson County. I'm going to play that and kind of talk about it as we go. So you can see here, this is quite a bit larger lake than the first two we saw, but you can see the spillways initiated. Good laminar flow right here, but you see a log here that's washed in. You see a bigger log right down here. Again, you see white water around it. That water is no longer flowing laminarly like it was, but it's tumbling right here. And it's going to start eating away at that substrate, at that soil, at the grass underneath it, and eventually down to bedrock. So I wanted to point that out. You also see down here kind of a horizon line. Now, it was engineered to drop an elevation right there. So there's a natural drop. But in addition to this, as you're going to see when he passes this tree, you're going to see a lot more white water going down this little incline. Now, what you don't see in this video is what was here before, and the landowner had put a fence right here with a big gate on it. This is a railroad tie, and that's a railroad tie that were fence posts right here for a gate. And you can see how that water is just tumbling down through there. So the result of those two things is what you see here. This is where that log was laying in that spillway. So you can see just because that log was laying there, you have erosion that cuts straight down through that soil. It's not very deep there. That's unconsolidated bedrock, and it started eroding around that tree. Just simple, something as simple as that. Now, if that event continues for a much longer time, what you have happening is where it starts to erode up here, start head cutting up toward the dam, and eventually it could have a breach. And we did have a breach in Marshall County from this event. Right over here, you see where the fence posts were, right here and right here. You see some of the old fence right here. Once those logs hit that fence, it started undercutting that fence, and you see all this erosion that happened down here. If this would have been a planter grassed waterway, you wouldn't see near the erosion that you see here. And again, these are just some lessons that I wanted to show you real quick. And all in all, these were in pretty good condition. But you see just the smallest little thing can have an effect on how these structures perform. So that's why it's important for us to make sure that we perform that operations and maintenance like we should do, because the smallest thing can make a big difference. Just a couple of pictures here. Like I said, this is the conference in Texas. I ended up doing a presentation on this. I didn't really expect to, but I was kind of thrown in the spotlight. And we talked about Kentucky and this flood for a good amount of time down there. And it was very educational to me because I learned a lot. They had some of the best engineers in the country with regards to watershed dams down there. And they were able to dissect these photos that we had, some of the ones that Renee took, and really show us some of the things that were happening on the ground. This is going back just to that video that I mentioned with EOW. We shot the first day on May the 7th. This is at Red Lick over near Berea, Kentucky. Those are DOW engineers with the chairman of the board over there, the Red Lick Watershed Conservancy District Board. We're going to shoot tomorrow, but that's been postponed. We're going to have about 2 more days to shoot. And hopefully this video is going to be ready sometime in the midsummer, probably mid-July to early August. We'll have this ready. We're going to put it up on our YouTube page, and any Watershed Conservancy District will be able to reference this, and you'll be able to look at what the DOW inspectors look at when they go out on dams, what they're looking for, things to look for and avoid. So I think that will be a really, really educational video that when we get that finished. So, okay, so we're kind of done with the flood. We kind of looked at that. Now we're looking at, okay, do we have any funding for this? So shortly after the flood, I was educated on the federal program that's probably going to deal with a lot of the damage from this flood to watershed dams. And that's the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, or EWP for short. I'll refer to it as EWP from now on. So that's the federal program that's going to hopefully help fix some of the damage incurred by this flooding event. Now, EWP is a 75-25 match, which means it's 75% federal and 25% is going to be provided by the local sponsor, which in most cases, that's going to be Watershed Conservancy districts, as far as what we're talking about right now. So one thing that we looked at, many of you are probably aware that just a little bit over 4 years ago, The Kentucky legislators set aside $5 million to be used for watershed rehabilitation projects. That was through NRCS. That money was to be leveraged against NRCS funds for watershed rehabs. Okay, so that money has been sitting there since then. We haven't spent any of that money. After consulting with NRCS, we're really not close to spending any of that money on those particular projects, the rehab projects. But I went back and I consulted with my staff and with our attorneys in the cabinet and looked at the language in that bill. And it's a little bit vague. It doesn't name the program. It just says leveraged against federal match. So when we looked at this and with our attorneys, it was determined by the cabinet and ultimately voted on by the Stormwater Conservation Commission that since that was for federal leverage, that this money, some of this funding could be used for some of these repairs or slash rehabs from this flood event. So we got over that hurdle. We now have some funding that we may be able to help out some of the sponsors with some of this funding. So that's kind of the path that we're on now. We're also going to continue our normal operations, what we're on before as far as training and engagement with Watershed Conservancy District. So that's still going to be done as well. But today's presentation is primarily going to talk about this funding that we have available. So again, I'm going to kind of jump back to EWP. EWP has been designated for that flood event in this case. I have some information here on EWP. I want to tell you that it is a federal program. Me or my staff are not experts on EWP. We can answer probably some very general questions, but most questions will refer back to our federal partners. There's actually going to be a meeting on that tomorrow with some of them out in West Kentucky, and they will pass that information along to you all. But essentially, the bare bones is it's a 75-25 match, and the sponsor has to apply in the form of a written request to NRCS. So just a couple of items for that. I don't want to get too much into our partners program, but there is a firm deadline to request this funding through EWP with NRCS, and that is June the 6th for this event. For the event that happened in early April here, the flooding event, for the eligible counties that were declared as a disaster, the sponsors in those counties may apply for this up until June the 6th. That has to be to NRCS. Now, that's the federal side. After they receive that, they have 60 days to respond to you or the sponsor with a damage survey report. That means that they're going to go out and look at the damage. They're going to do a report, and they're going to have a cost estimate within that report. That cost estimate is key because you're not going to know how much money to request on the state side, your sponsor portion, until you have that estimate in hand. So all of the work up front is going to be with NRCS on the federal side. Once a sponsor gets that damage survey report back, or DSR, you'll have that estimate, and that will be the time that we can apply for the state funding that will help support you in that project. So here is a draft. We haven't sent this out public yet, but we're pretty much done with it. This is the application if you're a sponsor and you want to seek funding for this project. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here. One is EWP, and again, I'm not going into a lot of detail. It also can apply to other storm damage other than to dams. For this purpose, if you're a sponsor for this state money, it's only for Watershed Conservancy District dams, only for those structures. That's the only way we can use this money is on those structures. In addition, when you apply for this money, we're going to ask you some questions, and I'm not going to go through this whole document right now for you. We'll get this out to everybody pretty short notice, but we're going to look at how you operate as a district, as a sponsor when we receive this funding request. Again, remember, while I'm talking about this is going to be after you receive your estimate from NRCS, because you're going to have a ballpark figure of what you anticipate you might be spending on this project. So we're going to check on things like your board activity, your bonding. Are you going to have enough bonding to be able to have this much money passing through your district? We're going to look at your annual financial reports. And this money is going to be a cost reimbursement type money. So in other words, you're going to have to spend the money up front, and then we're going to come back. You're going to provide receipts to us, and we will come back and reimburse that. The Soil and Water Conservation Commission will approve those applications, and once receipts are received, it's going to be very similar to our state cost share program in the way we put BMPs on the ground. It's going to be reimbursed after the fact. So one item that I want to point out here, and I think this is a big one for people to understand, on the very bottom of this page, and I know some of you on your devices probably can't read this, the Soil and Water Conservation Commission requires that local match cover at least 25% of that total 25% EWP sponsor match. So that's a mouthful, and I know it sounds kind of confusing. So I have an example here. So your local government / sponsor is going to be responsible for a quarter of that 25% match to the federal government. So what that means is, and I just did some really easy numbers here because they're nice and clean. If we have a $160,000 project, I just kind of made that number up. So 25% of that would be $40,000. So if we have a $160,000 total project, then the sponsor, which is the local Watershed and Conservancy district, your responsibility is going to be $40,000. Okay, so we can stop there. $40,000. Now, if you want to request extra funding from us, we have that available. However, you're going to be at least responsible for 25% of that, which is $10,000. So you have to have some skin in the game. We just don't want people to send us requests for $40,000 just because the money's there and it's easy to get, because we still have to do rehab work what this money was designed to do originally. So we still have some big projects like that to put this money toward. So basically 25% of 25%. Does anybody have any questions about that? Does that make sense to everybody? I want to make sure we understand that before we move forward. And we will be here to answer any questions that you might have during this process. Now, one thing I want to point out on this as well, that can be cash. So that $10,000 that you would be responsible for. So overall, $160,000 in this example, you would be responsible for 10. So what does that mean? It can mean $10,000 out of your budget that you pay down on the work done. If you work with your county, I know Grayson County is a good example of this in previous storm damage. It could be in-kind money, labor, or equipment usage. Grayson County has done a really good job of working with their fiscal court, and they've gotten the usage of some county equipment and county labor that they can put toward that match. So it doesn't have to be cash match in all cases. Those are the two primary forms of match that NRCS has relayed to me. If we have any more specific questions about that, we can get with them. But it doesn't necessarily have to be cash if you're putting something else forward for that. So on the second page, just a brief summary, you're going to have that in your DSR. One thing I want to point out on here is we also do not want this to turn into people applying to get repair work done if it existed before this flood event. In other words, if you haven't been doing your due maintenance the way you should have the last 10 years, and that spillway was already in kind of rough shape, this is an emergency fund here. This is not to alleviate anything that might have been done through negligence before. So that is also a requirement for EWP. I kind of read through and made sure of that in their literature. So we're just going to have you check that box on here that it was not. You're going to sign that. We're going to ask for a few things to accompany this application. The most recent annual financial report, that original EWP request letter to NRCS, and a copy of that damage survey report, and the minutes from your last meeting approving this application for your board approval. Those are the primary things that we're going to want in conjunction with this application. And then as most of our forms, you're going to submit it to conservation at KY.gov, and you're going to put attention Melinda Murphy watershed funding application. So that's pretty much it for the overview of what we're looking at here. So does anybody have any questions about anything at this point? Shanna, is there anything that I failed to mention that you would like to add?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay. Surely somebody's got some questions about this. And I'll tell you up front, if you do have questions, we might not know yet. We're kind of feeling our way through this just like everybody else is. This is really new. We've been working pretty much around the work clock for us, trying to get these things in order, get them ready for the commission meetings that we've had. So we're on the front edge of this as well. So we might be working together through some of these first ones.
Hey, Jay, this is Alan.
Yes.
Got just a quick question for you.
Uh-huh.
The deadline, the June 6th deadline.
Yes.
Have you all been in touch with, I guess, the most impacted, those that are going to be in the most need to apply? Are they aware of this, of the availability of funds?
Shanna should be able to answer that better than I can, just because of geographic location. I know that NRCS has reached out through their staff, their county district staff, to get this information out. They're having an area meeting tomorrow, but we will certainly send out an email this week reinforcing that to make sure everybody does get that information.
Okay. Just wanted to inquire.
Yes.
All right.
And
Hey, sounds
again,
good.
I want to reiterate that June the 6th deadline, that is for that federal request. You're not going to apply for this state funding if you do until later after you get your estimate.
Gotcha. Okay. Hey, thanks.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Any other questions or concerns?
Hey Jay, this is Fanny in Litchfield.
Hey, Fanny.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. I don't want to speak for Renee or Big Greedy, but there was a slight concern about, that upfront cost before reimbursement, right? Whether it's in materials or even potentially in hiring equipment, hiring labor, if there is no in-kind available,
Right.
that's going to cost money. And likely these contractors are not going to be willing to potentially wait through the reimbursement process.
Right.
Is there any advice or strategy on potentially, if they don't have the liquid cash to pay these contractors, is there any advice or strategy on how to loan money?
I think it's so a couple things on that. First of all, I checked with our legal staff and our budget people in cabinet about this. It would be a really, really hard sell to them to send this money out without a reimbursement process. It would be legally really tough on us to be able to do that. I did ask about that. With regards to local funding, I think it's very important to establish early in a relationship with your local government, your county government. I think that could probably get you some capital if they know that money is likely to be reimbursed, or you'll know it'll be approved before that time comes. But I think it's very important that that avenue is researched. I've had a couple of comments made, and Fanny, you might have made one of these, which is good. I needed to hear these things, about a county saying, well, you all get millage tax or your local tax to be able to pay for things like this. And that's not necessarily the case. They get taxed to perform routine operation and management, not a flood event like this. This is out of the ordinary. So no, the districts don't have enough funding to tackle something like this typically. But I can't really offer any financial advice past that. I would say work closely with your county governments. I think they would be the best resource to point us in the right direction on that.
I guess I just want to make sure that, you all are aware and at least considering that potentially there could be county governments out there that have other priorities after
Right.
the storm,
Yeah.
that may not be able to, you know, to share that burden
Right.
immediately. So,
And that's part of the reason too we want to look at the annual financial reports and the standing of the district at the time, because we've gone out and we've seen the worst of these. I think a majority of these repairs are going to be pretty moderate. Now we saw some pretty bad examples that are going to be a little bit more than moderate, but I think the majority of these are not going to be just these gargantuan projects that's just going to break the county or the district. So I think, except in isolated incidents, I think we'll be okay on that. But absolutely, I'll look into that and talk to some people about it that have more experience than I do in that realm of painting resources. But yes, that's right now the best advice I can give is work with your local counties.
yeah, that'd be appreciated. And I mean, of course, after exhausting, right, the
Right.
local government, that's kind of when I'm seeing potentially advising. And hopefully we don't come
Right.
to that, we
And-
have our cash flow and
Right.
county
And
can kick in.
of course, you're sitting in a county that's got what, 3 watershed conservancy districts in it. I mean, it's kind of a tough sell when you got that many. I completely understand that. So
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
Jay, this is Pam Williams.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if USDA and RCS still do this process, but a few years back in some of their practices and programs and stuff, they used to do what's called an assignment of payment.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that might work well, even with your fiscal court or even with a bank loan, where the conservation district, instead of the money going to them, it would automatically go to the bank, once the practice is completed, and like I said, I think it's something that we could look into with NRCS to see if they do an assignment of payment. So that way, if the conservation district didn't have the money up front or whatever they needed, they could work with that, either their local fiscal court or maybe a local bank, to see if they would do that assignment of payment, to kind of get them through the rehabilitation stages. And then,
We'll check on those things. I've never even heard of that within our CS, but we'll certainly look into this and see if we can't get at least some leads on this kind of thing.
yeah, that was a few years back. Like I said, I don't know if they do that anymore or not.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Jay, real quickly, from Randy McCown from Callaway County, our
Yes.
board's here watching.
Yes,
We
sir.
appreciate you doing this. When you talk about reimbursement, all of our watersheds are owned. The land part of it is owned by landowners, which I assume
Right.
most of them are across the state. We
Right.
manage, and help with maintenance and that kind of thing. Would the reimbursement, would the landowner be responsible for a project, let's say 160,000 like you used? And then the reimbursement go directly to the landowner, or would the conservation district have to carry those costs and then turn in receipts, and then that money comes to the conservation district who gets reimbursed for all the work? Or, I mean, how does that work?
It would be the district. So this is something that goes into the property rights and ownership and all that pot of information. So the districts or the sponsors actually own the structures, and that includes the spillway. So it's a structure. Think about it. I heard it at that conference. They put it like a utility easement, like power lines. The landowner doesn't own those power lines, but they go above his property. And that's how they look at these dams. So you all own the structures if you're the sponsor. So that is your responsibility. Anything extra is between you all and the landowner. For instance, I'm just going to throw this out there because we just saw pictures of it. That one gentleman was wanting to know if somebody's going to repave his driveway. That's between the district and that landowner. And I would say that's a stretch for using any tax dollars to do anything like that. However, yes, the structure is owned by the sponsor, and that reimbursement will go to you. We won't be paying out to any landowners directly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but the reason I ask that is we're carrying that expense because whoever does the work is going to want to be paid as soon as
Right.
possible. So, in essence, a lot of the districts don't have the money to carry 160,000 or a 400,000, whatever a project might be, if it's very significant at all, to carry that along. Okay.
Yes, and that's, and I want to remind you as well. That's only going to be the very largest ones. There's not a lot, but I know y'all got one out there that's probably going to be pretty good. Most of these are going to be more reasonable, but yes, I'm going to look into this and see what we can find out. I can't make any promises, but we'll see if we can get some advice for some of these questions on the money up front part.
Okay, because most of our damage on one particular case was the spillway came out and created all the damage with all the water that flowed out of it.
Yes.
And so on, which is
Downstream.
connected.
Yes.
Yeah, connected to the spillway. And I'm just sitting there saying, okay, if we have to carry that expense, we've got a millage tax, but it's not anything like that possibility that we don't get that much. We can operate our office and do some things, but not take on that kind of thing.
Some of this, and I'll be honest, Randy, I asked a similar question of NRCS when I talked to them from photos of that spillway. How far out do you all, I'm talking about the federal government, when you apply for EWP, how far does that spillway extend? How far are you going to repair that? I don't know the answer to that right now. I don't know if anybody does. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, but we're going to check on this. And like I said, I don't know the answer to these things right now, but we're going to certainly look into it, and we'll be communicating with you on it. All right. Anything else for us? I knew you'd ask about all this money. That's my least favorite topic. I'm not an economic person. So, Shanna, anything else you want to mention while we're on here?
No, I think we're good. I'm sure they're gonna process this though and have more questions.
Absolutely.
I just feel it.
This is the very first step of what we're looking at. And again, we're just kind of jumping into this ourselves. So we still got a lot to learn, a lot to organize. But we wanted to be ready for this when the EWP by the deadline so we could start working on this. So by all means, if any of you have any questions, follow-up questions, get with Shanna or myself, and I'll be looking into some of these topics that we've already talked about, specifically the money up front. I know that's a concern with everybody, and hopefully we can find some information for you on that. I'll also talk to our legal staff as well about that upfront money. But the way they described it when I asked the first time, it might be a bear to get that through our cabinet. So anything else before we log off here?
Jay, I do have a question.
Yes.
It's a thought of these dams. It seems like one of the reasons all this water's going, I mean, we're having major flood events, but another thing that we need to consider is a lot of these dams are filled with sediment, and therefore they're not holding the capacity they were. And so the water's going out the spillway more often now.
Right.
I feel like we're going to fix this problem now, but it's just going to happen again and wash it out again. That's
right.
what I is going to happen.
You're right. You're right.
And so we're wasting money on fixing it when we need to be thinking about dredging lakes.
And Renee, I'm gonna be honest, I'm unclear as far as if keeping that sediment out is just a natural process. It's going to be toward the end of the lake's life cycle, or if it's something that NRCS will want to address at some point. I don't think so. I've never heard any comments about that, but I can't speak for them. It's something that we certainly need to talk about because you're right. And, just for I know my staff has heard me say this 1,000 times, but you're correct. As we get these bigger precipitation events, these dams are going to protect us less and less. Because the reality is, once you fill that lake up with water, it's really no longer doing a lot for downstream because you got the same amount of water going in as you got going out. It's just it's a basic flow question and basic hydrology. So it's that interim, like you just said, Renee, which is right on point. If you have less volume to store, that makes that slot less and less that it's going to actually do good for downstream. So it's certainly something that we need to discuss going forward, I think.
Yeah.
So good point.
Like, are we gonna let them all just turn into swamps, or are we gonna what?
Or as they call them now, green sinks. That's the key term now, is green sinks.
Even with the one here in Big Reedy, it's already causing water to back up into the upper end of the lake and creating swamps where there wasn't before,
Right.
It's already doing that.
I agree, and I will pick some brains on that to the experts that I know, and I will certainly share any information I get with that. As far as, was there ever a plan long term to do anything like that? Of course, you know how this stuff works. We're that generation that's kind of taking care of something that was done 50 years ago that they really probably didn't have a plan for. So, but yeah, let me ask about that, and I will get back with you because that's a good question.
Okay. Because I was wondering if that's what that 5 million or whatever it was you have set aside. Is it for stuff like that, or is it just for
that is
like dam failures or something? I guess
that money was for dam rehabilitation, which by NRCS definition means a total redesign of a dam to meet current standards. Primarily for dams that went from like low hazard to high hazard dams. They had to be re-engineered. That's primarily what that was for.
Yeah. So has the Division of Water inspected all these dams since the flood?
I can't speak to that. I'm assuming they have the majority of them. I know NRCS has inspected all of theirs. Now, NRCS has 200 dams in the state, and that's primarily what we deal with as Watershed Conservancy districts. Total, there's 981 dams on DOW's inspection list. So fish and wildlife dams, local city dams, there's all kinds of other dams other than NRCS dams on that list. Have they been to each one of those? I'm sure they have not. But NRCS has inspected each one of these dams. So I know that for a fact.
Yeah, they were out here surveying last week on the 20th.
Okay. NRCS was?
Yes.
Okay.
When we had our meeting with Fanny came to our meeting, explained their program to us, to our board at the Big Reedy Watershed Board. And she told us they would be so they're doing the survey in order to make that report you talked about.
Right. Okay.
And
good.
The dam, whatever report, I forgot what it's called.
Okay. Well, I'll be talking to Scott Snyder a lot in the coming weeks, and I'll make sure that we have a conversation about the sedimentation. It's not going to be like a critical thing right this minute because of all this other stuff, but there's got to be some idea about long range, what's going to happen with that. So we'll get back with you on that.
And one thing she did say, Fanny said that, if you, like we sent our letter in already, the Big Reedy Watershed did. She says they'll get us that report back, but we're not committed yet until we get that report back. What the cost is. So that was important for us as a group that we're not, when you send the letter in, you're not committed to accepting the 75%.
Exactly.
Another thing about, you have to get that, I can't think of the name of it, but you have to get on there's a program they have, and you got to get signed up in on that in order to get payments from the federal government.
That's the SAMS number.
Yeah, the SAMS number. So you got to get that, and it's best to do it now before, even if you're not getting paid more.
And your local NRCS staff should be able to help out with that. And I just went online to find a video that kind of helps out and how to.
Yeah, I saw that.
So if y'all need any help with that, reach out to us too, and we'll get you in touch with the right people and get you that video at least. None of my people that I know have ever done that, so I don't have a direct experience, but we'll get you some help somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all I had.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for the picks again. Those are outstanding.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Anything else? All right, well, we'll keep in touch. I'll look into some of these things that we've asked about tonight. Hopefully we can get some good answers for you all, at least some good guidance, and we'll move forward. But again, if you have any questions or any other concerns that came up, just let Shannon or me know, and we'll try to address those as efficiently as we can. So thank you all very much for being on tonight.